As Sarah walked into the living room, her usual confident smile wavered. She held a bouquet of white lilies, their sweet scent filling the air, a scent that once symbolized love but now reeked of deceit. Her eyes fell on the wall where their wedding photo used to hang, now replaced by an empty space, glaring and cold. Her heart stopped. David, sitting calmly on the sofa, looked up, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Something missing, Sarah?" he asked, his voice as steady as a knife's edge. She froze, her face draining of color, unable to answer the question she knew was coming. But before we dive into the story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Here we go. David sat silently in the familiar room, once filled with laughter and endless stories. In his hands was an old worn book, a birthday gift from Sarah. But today the pages couldn't transport him far from reality. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with a suffocating unease, pierced only by the faint scent of white lilies. Once a symbol of pure love, the flowers now evoked nothing but deception and betrayal. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting its glow on items that bore witness to their love. On the wall, a wooden clock, a wedding anniversary gift, ticked slowly. Each measured chime deepened the gulf between two people under the same roof. David's eyes briefly rested on the clock before turning away. Time, for him, had become nothing more than a chain of drawn-out lies. In the corner of the room, where a grand wedding photo once hung, there was now an empty, desolate space. He had taken it down that morning, not because he had forgotten, but because it had become a more painful reminder than he could bear. The image of Sarah in her radiant white dress, her smile seemingly holding the world, now twisted his heart. That emptiness was not only on the wall, but had seeped into every crevice of their fractured relationship. David placed the book down, his gaze distant. He tried to maintain a calm facade, but his fingers clenching tightly against the table's edge betrayed the deep anguish within. Sarah, the woman who had once been his entire world, now felt like a perfect mask hiding lies. Beneath her flawless exterior, he had begun to see the cracks he once chose to ignore. The room's atmosphere was laden with tension, as if a great storm were on the horizon. David glanced out the window, where the fading light of the day mirrored the waning warmth in his heart. His resolve hardened. Answers would be found, and he was ready to confront the truth, no matter how harsh it might be. The wooden door quivered slightly as the key turned in the lock. A small sound, yet it echoed throughout the silent house, breaking the heavy atmosphere like a ripple across a still lake. David kept his eyes fixed on the clock on the wall, its hands moving steadily, indifferent to the storm brewing around them. From the hallway, Sarah's voice called out, sweet yet strange, "Honey, I'm home." The click of her high heels against the wooden floor reverberated through the room, each step pounding in David's mind. He used to love that sound. Each footfall once meant her return, the joy of reuniting after a long day. But today every step carried an oppressive weight, like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. Turning his head, David regarded her with a calm expression, as still as a mirror-like lake, though inside his emotions churned like a raging sea. Sarah entered the living room with a smile on her lips, but her eyes briefly avoided the empty space on the wall where their wedding photo used to hang. She paused, adjusted her hair, and placed a bouquet of white lilies on the table, her smile brightening. "I saw these flowers and thought they were so beautiful, so I bought them for you. You love lilies, don't you?" she said, her voice striving for a natural tone. David's gaze shifted to the bouquet, its pure white petals and golden stamens exuding an image of flawless innocence. Yet to him, they were no longer a symbol of love. Those petals now felt like a veil concealing the truth, pristine on the surface, but rotting at the roots. He responded with a slight nod, his lips unmoving, as his eyes fell on Sarah's hands. She held the bouquet, but her trembling fingers betrayed an unease she couldn't hide. The air between them grew thicker, weighed down by unspoken words. Sarah glanced around the room, her gaze landing on the bowl of keys on the shelf, where David had deliberately placed 2 movie tickets meant for someone else. In that fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of realization in her eyes. She had begun to sense that something was amiss, but instead of showing her apprehension, she responded with a light smile, the kind David knew all too well, her weapon of choice to deflect suspicion. "What do you want?" This time, however, he was ready. David remained silent on the sofa, his gaze following Sarah's every move. His face betrayed no emotion, as though her presence held no significance to him. Inside, however, the pain cut deep, like sharp knives carving through his chest. But he had learned to hide it behind an impenetrable exterior. His hand flicked a page in the book, though none of the words registered in his mind. Sarah, having placed the bouquet of lilies on the table, tried to appear at ease, but her restless eyes told another story. She moved to the bookshelf, lightly tracing a finger across its dusty surface before stopping. The wedding photo was no longer in its usual spot. For a brief moment, her brows furrowed, but she quickly composed herself, turning to David with a forced smile. "Where's our wedding photo?" she asked, her voice gentle yet tinged with unease. David looked up, his gaze cold. "Oh, I thought it no longer suited the space," he replied, his tone low and deliberate, stretching the distance between them even further. Sarah pressed her lips together, a flicker of unease crossing her eyes. She turned away, pretending to search for something, though it was a feeble attempt to mask her emotions. Her steps led her to the small shelf holding the bowl of keys. When her eyes landed on it, she froze. Inside the bowl were 2 neatly placed movie tickets. For a show last night, a romantic film she hadn't heard about. "Movie tickets?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the tension was evident in every word. She picked up one ticket and stared at it, as if hoping to find a plausible explanation written somewhere. "You went to the movies last night?" David's lips curled slightly, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Yes, I thought it might be good to relax a bit," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Sometimes, doing things alone helps you see everything more clearly." "Oh." Sarah set the ticket down, her hands instinctively clenching at her sides. She tried to appear composed, but David could see the growing unease in her every movement, the nervous brush of her hand through her hair, her evasive eyes, and her increasingly uneven breaths. The room's atmosphere grew more oppressive. The ticking of the wall clock, steady and rhythmic, now felt like an ominous reminder. Sarah turned back toward David, attempting to deflect the conversation. "You didn't tell me," she said, her voice trailing off. "There are many things I haven't told you, Sarah," David replied, his voice quiet yet heavy with meaning, "just as there are many things you haven't told me." His words made her flinch slightly. The ever-present smile vanished from her lips, replaced by a visible unease she couldn't mask. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. David didn't need an explanation. Rising slowly, he walked toward the table where the bouquet of lilies lay, pristine and silent. His hand brushed over the soft petals, his gaze lingering on them before turning back to Sarah. "What do you think about lilies?" he asked, his voice calm to the point of being cold. Sarah froze. "They're beautiful and pure," she answered, though her voice lacked confidence. "Exactly, but not everything that looks beautiful is truly what it seems," David said, his eyes piercing through the flawless facade she tried so hard to maintain. The tension in the room thickened to the point of suffocation, each passing second stretching into an eternity. Sarah said nothing, and David didn't need her to. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The storm was about to break. Sarah tried to remain calm, but her unease was evident. Her eyes darted to the empty spot on the wall where their wedding photo once hung. Her gaze flickered, as if searching for a reasonable explanation before she finally spoke. "David," she called, her voice slightly trembling, though she masked it with a veneer of artificial gentleness. "Our wedding photo, where is it? Why did you take it down?" David looked up from his book, his eyes as calm and steady as a still lake. He didn't answer immediately, letting the heavy silence between them linger. After what felt like an eternity, he closed the book and set it on the table. "It doesn't belong there anymore," he said, his tone measured yet cold. Sarah furrowed her brows, her hand unconsciously twisting a lock of hair, a familiar gesture whenever she felt uneasy. Doesn't belong? What do you mean? It's our wedding photo. You used to say it was the most important thing to you. We had a very bad divorce when I saw the evidence, he replied. Yes, David replied, his gaze piercing hers. It was important. But now, it's just a reminder of what's been lost. His response made Sarah take a small step back, as if each word was a dagger cutting into her confidence. David, what are you trying to say? She asked, her voice growing quieter, the worry in her tone becoming harder to hide. David crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his demeanor calm, almost unnervingly so, as if he had been preparing for this confrontation for a long time. Sarah, don't you see it? That empty space on the wall? It's just like the empty space in our relationship. Sarah opened her mouth, trying to form a response, but no words came out. Her hands gripped the hem of her shirt tightly, her trembling fingers betraying the anxiety she desperately tried to conceal. I don't understand why you're saying this, she said, attempting to keep her voice steady. We've been through so much together, haven't we? You can't just take down the photo without telling me. David leaned forward, his eyes sharp, but his voice chillingly soft. You think I shouldn't have taken it down? Then what about the things you've been hiding from me, Sarah? Don't I have the right to know, or are those things also too out of place to bring up? His words hit her like a hammer. Sarah's expression faltered, her eyes filling with confusion and panic. David, what are you talking about? She asked, but her voice lacked the strength it once held. What I'm saying, David replied, his words slow and deliberate, is that when something no longer represents the truth, keeping it around is just lying to yourself. Sarah stood frozen, not daring to take a step forward, as though every word David spoke erected an invisible wall between them. She bit her lip, her eyes flickering between guilt and fear. David, I'm sorry if I've done something to make you feel this way, she said, trying to steer the conversation away. But David didn't let her escape. You know exactly what's made me feel this way, Sarah, he said, his gaze unrelenting. Don't apologize for things you're not ready to admit. The air between them felt stretched to its breaking point, the tension palpable. Both of them could feel it, but this time David held the upper hand. He knew the truth would surface soon enough. David's gaze hardened as the silence in the room grew heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah stood across from him, her posture tense, but trying to maintain the composure she had mastered over the years, yet the cracks were beginning to show. Her fingers trembled slightly as they clutched the edge of the table, and her smile faltered every time their eyes met. Finally, David broke the silence, his voice low and deliberate. Sarah, he began, leaning back in his chair. How long do you think you can keep pretending? Her breath hitched, and for a brief moment she seemed genuinely confused, or perhaps she was simply stalling. Pretending? What are you talking about? David tilted his head, his expression unreadable but his eyes piercing. Don't play dumb. You're better than that. Or at least, you used to be. Sarah blinked rapidly, her polished exterior cracking further. David, if this is about the photo— This isn't about the photo, David interrupted sharply. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make Sarah flinch. It's about everything else. The late nights, the lies, the perfume. He lingered on the last word, watching as her face turned pale. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she took a shaky step forward. David, What are you saying? He stood now, closing the distance between them, his voice steady but laced with quiet anger. I'm saying I know. About the dinners, the messages. Him. He said. The color drained from Sarah's face, and her mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. Her polished facade, the carefully constructed mask she wore, began to crumble before his eyes. How long have you known? She finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. David's lips curled into a bitter smile. Long enough. Or dying, she said coldly. Her shock turned to desperation. It wasn't what you think. It didn't mean anything. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Didn't mean anything? That's your defense? His voice dropped, quieter now but no less intense. You destroyed everything we built together, and you're standing here telling me it didn't mean anything?" She smiled. Sarah's eyes welled up, her breathing uneven. "David, please. I made a mistake, but it's not too late. We can fix this." He stepped back, shaking his head. "You don't fix this, Sarah. You don't patch it up with excuses and empty words." His voice softened, but his eyes held firm. "You made your choices. Now, you'll have to live with them." As the words settled in the air, Sarah looked at him, her polished exterior now fully shattered. For the first time, she realized there was no escape from the truth. David had seen through it all, and he was no longer willing to be a part of her carefully constructed illusion. David moved with a deliberate calmness, reaching for the small, unassuming wooden box resting on the side table. The room seemed to grow colder as he placed it on the coffee table between them. The box, with its worn edges and quiet simplicity, was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions it contained. "Do you know what this is, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady, though his eyes burned with unspoken pain. Sarah stared at the box as if it were a living thing, ready to attack. Her hands instinctively clenched at her sides. "David, I don't lie," he interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "You've done enough of that already." Britt was burning. With that, he opened the box. The faint creak of the hinges felt deafening in the tense silence. Inside, the first item was a stack of bank statements. David lifted them out, spreading them across the table. His fingers trembled slightly, not from hesitation, but from the weight of what he was about to say. "These," he began, tapping the papers, "show every dinner, every gift, payments that don't align with anything we shared, fancy restaurants I've never been to, jewelry I never saw. Do you think I wouldn't notice?" Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to the papers, scanning them frantically, as if hoping to find some flaw, some loophole. David didn't stop. He reached back into the box, pulling out printed phone records. The list of calls was long, the numbers repeated frequently. One name, in particular, was highlighted. "And this," he continued, placing the records beside the bank statements, "is every time you called him. Morning, noon, night. Even when I was in the next room, Sarah." His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself, not letting her see too much of his pain. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stammered. "David, it's not what you think." "Not what I think," he cut her off, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "Don't insult me by pretending this is less than what it is." Finally, David reached for the last item in the box, a set of photographs. He placed them on top of the other evidence with quiet finality. The pictures were damning. Intimate moments captured in stolen glances, a hand lingering too long, and smiles that spoke of betrayal. Sarah gasped audibly, a hand flying to her mouth. "David, please!" But he wasn't done. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, he lifted the final piece from the box, a folded piece of paper, yellowed slightly at the edges from being handled so many times. "This," he said, his voice softer now, "is the hardest thing I've ever written." He unfolded the letter, the creases well worn from being read and reread. He handed it to her without another word. Sarah hesitated but took the letter, her hands shaking. As she read, David watched the expressions flicker across her face: shock, guilt, and finally, despair. The letter was simple, yet each word carried the weight of his heartbreak. "Sarah, I loved you with everything I had. I trusted you, believed in you, and built a life around you. But trust is fragile, and you shattered it piece by piece. The late nights, the excuses, the lies, they didn't just break my heart. They broke the foundation of us. This box isn't about revenge, it's about clarity. I needed to see the truth for what it is, even when it hurt more than I thought possible. You may call it a mistake, but I call it a choice you made over and over again." Now making my David. When she finished reading, Sarah's hands fell limp, the letter slipping from her grasp and fluttering onto the table. Tears streamed down her face, but David felt no satisfaction, only an aching emptiness. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Finally, David spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the truth, Sarah. You can deny it all you want, but it won't change what's in front of you." Sarah looked up at him, her polished exterior completely destroyed. For the first time, she had no words, no excuses, and no mask to hide behind. David stood, leaving her to face the evidence of her choices, the weight of her betrayal sinking in. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice trembling as she tried to piece together a defense. "David, I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly." David stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. He shook his head slowly, leaning forward, his voice firm but steady. "A mistake, Sarah. That's what you're calling this. No. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake is spilling coffee on the carpet. What you did," his voice hardened, "was no mistake." She flinched at his words, but he didn't stop. "Do you even know how many times I told myself that I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid?" His eyes burned with intensity as he continued. "Do you remember all those nights you came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't yours? The way you'd laugh it off, saying it was from a coworker's hug, or how your stories about work dinners never seemed to add up?" Rain's face darkened further, but was not under his control. David's voice cracked slightly, and he exhaled sharply, grounding himself before continuing. "I wanted to believe you, Sarah. I wanted to trust you so badly that I ignored every red flag waving in my face. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it to myself." Sarah took a shaky step forward, tears streaming down her face. "David, I know I hurt you, but I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" He cut her off, his tone rising slightly. "Every dinner, every phone call, every lie. You didn't mean to. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident." Her sobs grew louder, but David's resolve remained unshaken. He took a step back, creating more distance between them, his posture rigid and unwavering. He paused, taking into consideration the man's sympathies, his own heart pounding as thousands of thoughts flew through his mind. "Do you know what it felt like to sit alone at night, wondering where you were? To question every word that came out of your mouth because I could feel the truth slipping further away every day?" His voice was quieter now, but every word struck like a hammer. Sarah collapsed into the chair behind her, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her sobs. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. But can't we try to fix this?" David looked at her, his face devoid of the tenderness it once held. "Fix this?" he repeated almost to himself. Then, shaking his head, he replied, "No, Sarah, you can't fix something you've already destroyed, and you can't undo the choices you made." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his words suffocating any attempt she might have made to respond. The damage was done, and for David, there was no turning back. David let out a slow breath, his voice calm but unyielding as he broke the silence. "Sarah, I've made my decision. This isn't something I came to lightly, and it isn't something I can change. I'm leaving." Her head snapped up, tears streaking her face, but the look in her eyes was one of disbelief. "David, no, you don't mean that. We can talk this through, work it out. Please." He shook his head, his resolve unshaken. "I've already started preparing," he said evenly, stepping back from the emotional chaos that had filled the room moments ago. "My things are packed. The divorce papers are ready. I even filed them this morning." Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her chest as though his words physically struck her. "No, David, please don't do this. We can fix this. Whatever it takes. I'll change. You had the chance to change," he interrupted firmly. "Every lie you told, every time you looked me in the eye and chose deceit, you made this inevitable." He paused for a moment, his gaze softening slightly as he looked at her crumbling before him. "This isn't about revenge or anger anymore. It's about freedom. I refuse to live in a house built on lies. I deserve better than this. And frankly, so do you." The weight of his words seemed to settle over her as she sank deeper into the chair, her tears falling silently. David straightened his posture, his tone steady but final. "The prenuptial agreement," he began, "was something I hoped we'd never need. I signed it because I trusted that you'd never give me a reason to use it. But here we are." His lips curled into a bittersweet smile. "It's ironic, isn't it? that something we agreed on as a formality is now my safety net." As he spoke, David felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The decision had been made, and there was nothing left to weigh him down. He looked around the room one last time, his eyes lingering on the empty space where their wedding photo had once hung. "It's all done, Sarah," he said quietly. "The movers will come for the rest of my things tomorrow, and by the end of this, we'll both have a clean slate." With those words, David turned to leave. For the first time in months, he felt light, as though the weight of deceit had finally lifted off his shoulders. Though there was pain in walking away, there was also relief, a new beginning waiting just beyond the door. And as he stepped out, closing the door behind him, the sound was not an end, but a quiet, determined step into a freer, more honest future. As the door clicked shut behind David, the silence in the room felt deafening. Sarah remained motionless in the chair, her tear-streaked face frozen in disbelief. Slowly, her gaze drifted to the table in front of her, the bank statements, phone records, photographs, and the letter, all cruel reminders of the truth she could no longer deny. Her hands trembled as she reached out to pick up one of the photographs, her fingers brushing over the glossy surface as if trying to erase the damning evidence. The weight of it seemed unbearable. The realization hit her in waves, each stronger than the last. Her breaths grew shallow, uneven, and finally gave way to a heart-wrenching sob that echoed through the empty room. Sarah sank to her knees, clutching the photograph tightly against her chest. Her shoulders heaved with each sob as she curled into herself, surrounded by the physical manifestations of her portrayal. The bouquet of white lilies sat untouched on the table, now a hollow, mocking symbol of everything she had tried to mask. "David," she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking under the strain. "Please, don't leave me, please." She crawled toward the table, her hands fumbling for the letter David had left behind. Pulling it close, she read it again through blurry, tear-filled eyes. Every word cut deeper, carving into her the realization of just how deeply she had hurt him. Her voice rose in desperation as she called out again. "David, you said for better or worse. That was our vow. You promised me forever." Her words were choked by the sobs that overtook her. But her pleas were met with nothing but silence. David's absence loomed over her, an unbearable void that no words could fill. The room, once filled with shared memories, felt colder now. Sarah clutched the letter in one hand and a photograph in the other, her body shaking as she sat on the floor, surrounded by the very truth she had spent so long denying. Outside, the faint sound of David's car pulling away was the only response to her cries. She looked up at the empty space on the wall where their wedding photo had once hung, her tears falling freely. And though she whispered his name one last time, her voice was hollow, lost in the emptiness of the moment. The only thing left in the room was the overwhelming silence and the weight of her own choices. David stood in the doorway, his suitcase by his side, the familiar weight of it grounding him in the moment. He turned back one final time, letting his eyes sweep over the house that had once been their sanctuary. The walls, now shadowed in the fading light of late afternoon, seemed to carry the echoes of a life that no longer existed. Laughter, whispers, promises. All of it was gone, reduced to a haunting silence. He lingered for a breath, allowing himself one last glance at the living room. The table was still scattered with the evidence of Sarah's betrayal, and her sobs, faint and muffled, reached him from the other room. But the sound no longer pierced his heart. It was simply there, like the creak of an old floorboard or the hum of distant traffic. He felt no anger, no satisfaction, only a strange, quiet resolve. Stepping outside, he closed the door gently behind him. The click of the lock felt like a punctuation mark, final and irreversible. Everything was still. The air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. A soft breeze brushed against his face, and David inhaled deeply, letting it fill his lungs. For the first time in what felt like years, he could breathe freely. Above him, the sky stretched wide, painted in hues of soft pink and gold, as though the universe itself was offering him a clean slate. The suitcase's wheels rolled smoothly over the driveway as he walked toward his car, the rhythmic sound blending with the rustle of leaves in the wind. He opened the trunk and placed the suitcase inside, his movements deliberate but calm. As he slid into the driver's seat, David took one last look in the rearview mirror. The house stood silent, its windows reflecting the sunset, but to him, it was nothing more than a monument to what had been lost. Without hesitation, he started the engine, the hum steady and reassuring. The road stretched out before him, endless and open, a promise of freedom and a new beginning. As the car moved forward, David felt the weight of the past lift, leaving him lighter than he'd been in years. As the car sped down the open road, David let his thoughts wander, unburdened by the weight he had carried for so long. The air rushing through the cracked window felt fresh and alive, brushing against his face like a gentle reminder of his newfound freedom. For the first time in what felt like forever, his chest no longer felt heavy, and his mind was no longer clouded by doubt or suspicion. This wasn't about revenge. He had no interest in bitterness or retribution. This was about reclaiming himself, his self-worth, his peace of mind, and the parts of him that had been eroded by lies. He realized that walking away wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. To leave behind the life built on falsehoods was the only way to truly honor the person he was and the future he deserved. Glancing out the window, his eyes caught sight of wildflowers growing along the roadside. They were imperfect, their stems bent slightly by the wind, petals bruised by the elements. Yet, they stood resilient, thriving in a space where no one thought to care for them. He couldn't help but see himself reflected in them, not flawless, but free. The wildflowers seemed to whisper a quiet truth. Survival doesn't require perfection, only determination. David smiled faintly, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, as a sense of clarity washed over him. The road stretched endlessly before him, an open canvas where he could paint a new life, one untethered by deceit and betrayal. It was a life he hadn't thought possible just weeks ago, but now it was within reach. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the fields and painting the sky in warm hues of orange and pink. David glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The house was far behind now, its silhouette barely visible against the fading light. It was no longer a part of him, no longer a place he belonged. As he focused on the road ahead, a sense of finality settled deep within him. The lies, the heartbreak, the endless nights of doubt, they were all in the past now, left behind like a chapter closed for good. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, not out of tension but determination. The car hummed steadily as it moved forward, carrying him toward the unknown. For the first time, the uncertainty didn't scare him. It excited him. The future was unwritten, and he had the pen in his hand. The wildflowers along the road thinned out, but their memory lingered in his mind. They reminded him that even in the most unexpected places, life can flourish. And as the last rays of sunlight guided him onward, David felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. There was no looking back now, only the open road, the whisper of freedom, and the promise of a life lived on his own terms.